Buenas San half a day from Guam. You're listening to Memoirs Pacifica, a podcast exploring events, movements, and people in modern Micronesian history. I'm Tony Asios, the show's producer. This is the second portion of a two-part episode on the revival of the ancient practice of traditional seafaring in the Marianas, with the help of Carolinian navigators. So, if you haven't listened to part one yet, stop now and hit play on that. And for the rest of you, let's continue the voyage with this episode's anchor, Dr. Michael Lujan Bevacqua. Let's begin.
By the 1990s, the CHamoru Renaissance had become more mainstream. At this point, it had taken on more political dimensions and was sometimes referred to as decolonization. Organizations had formed to protest for the rights of the Chamorro people and the return of local lands taken by the U.S. military. Additionally, Guam and the CNMI had begun to participate in earnest in regional cultural exchanges such as the Festival of Pacific Arts. Likewise, masters of cultural crafts and trades began to receive more recognition and government support. Prior to his death in 2004, Tun Segundo was honored by the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency as a master of Chamorro culture for his carving skills. But decolonization isn't an attempt to simply return to the past. Rather, it is a way in which colonized people can draw upon those sources of strength and wisdom that sustain their ancestors, which can help their descendants to better chart their future course.
We can't change history. We can't change what's happened to us and our people, but we can't just sit back and complain about it either, right? You can sit there and you can ridicule and you can protest and you can argue, but it's not moving us forward. So my interpretation of trying to raise my children with a stronger sense of identity and a stronger spirit is just expose them as much as possible to everything. They get the Western education in the classroom, teach them in cultural values and let them grow from there.
Rob and his teacher's voyage to Guam would mark the first time a Chamorro had navigated the open ocean in a traditional canoe in most likely more than a century. The trip garnered a lot of attention in the Mariana Islands, which helped renew interest in navigation culture. By the late 1990s, several classes on traditional seafaring had been taught at the University of Guam. Here's Larry Cunningham.
Dr. Vince Diaz encouraged me to take a course from Manny Sakau on traditional navigation and seafaring, and just audit it and help him begin the Traditional Seafaring Society at the University of Guam. And we did that, and then we wanted to get a canoe, and we knew we had to have a canoe house first, so we built a canoe house down at the Paseo. And then Tom Tysopik and myself went to Puluwat, and with Manny Sakau and others, we sailed 2 canoes back to Guam. It took the entire trip took 7 days. But we weren't satisfied. Our long-range goal was to build and sail Chamorro canoes.
Several navigators from the Caroline Islands would play key roles in achieving this goal. But none were more important in those days than Manny Sakau, a 7th-generation navigator from Puluwat.
Imagine that. 7 generations, his great-great-great-great-grandfather, that knowledge passed down, and he was willing to share that with people in Guam.
In the 1970s, a Guam businessman purchased a traditional canoe from Puluwat, which was sailed back by Manny Sakau's grandfather, with a young Manny in tow. Manny's grandfather had never sailed to Guam before, but through chance and oral history, he already had intimate knowledge of Guam's topography.
So then he knew the name of every channel on Guam. And he came down to what we call the Talifac channel, where the bridge is in Agate. There's 2 Spanish bridges in Agate, and this is the Talifac one, the one that's close to the main highway. And so he came in there.
Not used to seeing these types of canoes around the island anymore, one Chamorro man wondered if the new arrivals were Tautomotna, the spirits of his ancestors.
Mr. Cruz, who owns the property there, he was setting his tecton net, and he saw these men in a canoe. He thought he saw a Tautomona at first. He asked, "Are you real?" And they said, yes, we're real. And they were afraid to go ashore because immigration and customs. And finally, they just stayed on the canoe that night.
Young Manny was quickly introduced to American cuisine at the Cruz household.
But the next day, Mr. Cruz finally talked the Puluwatans to come in. And Manny said that Mr. Cruz's wife fixed them spam and eggs. He said, that was the best thing I ever ate in my life, that spam. The first time he ate spam. And how good it was.
Sandra began her journey into the world of seafaring under the instruction of Manny as he helped lead a group named TASI, which stood for Traditions About Seafaring Islanders. The word TASI means ocean in Chamorro.
That was a very, very inspiring and emotional process to come to know and listen and work with Palomani Sakau from Puluwat Island, and to sit and learn more from Dr. Cunningham and other TASI members and other members from Puluwat Island. Because at this point, I already knew traditional voyaging. This is part of a secret, sacred realm.
Like so many of her peers, Sandra wanted to be led into the sacred realm. But the teaching of this knowledge to outsiders was controversial. Traditionally, it was only passed down within a family, and usually only to men, and almost never to someone from outside a master's small island community. Here's Larry Raigetal.
Some of this knowledge, including navigation and all the other components of it, were and are considered sacred knowledge. And it could, in the cultural practice, understood that it be taught within that circle. But there had been times in the past even where someone else outside of the circle, but from the same island, or maybe even a nearby island, would come into it with, of course, certain protocols and ways of doing it. So, for example, somebody else might be possessing a master in herbal medicine, traditional healing, or masseuse for broken bones. You might use that to learn something else and exchange that knowledge for it.
Restrictions on the open sharing of seafaring knowledge began to change in the 1970s as the Caroline Islands began to feel the impacts of modernization. Many Carolinian youth were interested in leaving their islands to find work and make money. There was a concern in the canoe houses and seafaring schools that several millennia worth of knowledge could be lost within 2 or 3 generations. Mau Pialug, a renowned navigator from the island of Satawal, courted controversy when he chose to teach seafaring far outside traditional circles in hopes of keeping the knowledge alive.
When he went out in the 70s to work with the Hawaiians in transfer seafaring and in particular traditional navigation to his apprentices from Hawaii. And that sort of was really frowned upon by his own people. People of the same circle were kind of really talking badly about that. But, at the end it all come around. I think Mao himself was a pioneer in that regard and came around and tried to explain to his own people the urgency of having to do this, and maybe the necessity of having to do this.
Rob Limtiako recalls how, when he and Gary first began sailing with Master Tawa in the 1980s, members of the community also questioned if their apprenticeships were appropriate.
Puluwat is shaped like a horseshoe, and it's ringed by huge canoe houses right on the water. And so there's 2 villages on one side of the horseshoe, and this is on the inner part of the lagoon. As we were raising the sail, I noticed that all the people stopped and they were watching. And I felt like, why are they watching us? And it hit me. Here are 2 outsiders that learned. And not everybody on Puluwat was happy that Tawa was teaching us. And they made that known. And I learned that his response is, I will teach who I want to. And everything stopped. They let it go because it was him saying that.
Years later, Rob's other instructor, Rapwi, who by then had become Rob's father-in-law, made a somewhat controversial decision to initiate his son-in-law as a master navigator in what is called a Pwo ceremony.
I said, okay. So we secured a location, and the ceremony was performed. And I have to make some distinctions here. I don't consider myself a navigator on equal terms with some of the navigators now and in the past, simply because I didn't go through the whole experience and a lot of the protocols that are necessary for that. And so I would defer to the navigators, many who have passed, but also the navigators that are still living and are recognized navigators. I'll give you their names: Alui, Cesario, Cecilio. And these are sons of navigators, and several are sons of Maupiailuk. So I don't consider myself in their, in that strata and that status, and rightfully so,
Similar to why Maupiailuk defied custom and taught native Hawaiians, Master Rapui made this gesture as a way to encourage youth to engage with an ancient art at risk of disappearing.
What I want to say about Rapui and why he did that, I think he was recognizing that this practice and the interest in the practice is in decline. And so I think part of his intent was to encourage, And the way you do that is sometimes you need to lift them up, like our kids. Not all of them are, if they participate in a sport, for example, but they're not the star of the team, you're still out there rooting for them. And that's the feel that I got from him. He said, look, I'm for you. Yes, do it.
Manny Sakau's decision to teach CHamoros was also met with criticism, even from his own family.
In Manny's case, his grandfather wasn't willing to share, not for $1 million or anything. But Manny's great-great-grandfather, Seacow, had broken with tradition and had shared with people outside the family and shared with different islands. And so Manny went to Vince and said, I'm willing to teach. And then he officially changed his name to Manny Seacow, after his great-great-grandfather, who was one who shared outside the family.
Under the guidance of Manny and others, several canoe clubs and seafaring societies were formed on Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. These efforts culminated in a historic event in 2008, the launching of Saina, the first Chamorro Sakman in centuries. Sandra Okada was chosen to be a part of the crew for the Saina's maiden voyage. They would travel 40 miles north to Rota, an island in the Mariana Archipelago.
I was honored to be invited to join the crew, so I reluctantly accepted because I didn't feel I was worthy to be on board such a symbolic vessel. At this point, we knew Chamorros had not built a traditional canoe on Guam shores and hadn't voyaged for nearly 250 years. So I felt a huge obligation and a huge responsibility. Who's on that vessel? That's a sacred vessel. Truly must be worthy. So when I boarded the Saina for the voyage to Rota, I did it with reservation. I did it with humility and extreme respect, because I realized what an honor it was to be on board. I did not take it lightly at all.
Guam and Rota, along with the other 13 islands in the Mariana Archipelago, are the ancestral home of the Chamorro people. But these islands have been politically divided since 1898, when Spain ceded Guam to the United States after the Spanish-American War. Meanwhile, the northern islands were colonized by Germany, and then the Japanese. Today, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, or the CNMI, are in political union with the U.S., while Guam remains an unincorporated territory. This political division means that anyone traveling from Guam to Rota requires permission from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. While waiting for the day of their launch to arrive, the crew of the Saina were asked to fill out immigration forms. They found it ironic that in their effort to reconnect with other Chamorro islands in the manner of their ancestors, they still required the permission of the U.S. government.
This is an ancient tradition, But we had to fill out these immigration forms, and all of a sudden it had flight or vessel number. And we all kind of paused and looked at each other, and everyone's, flight, voyage, estimated departure time, no such thing. It's a Western concept. I said, okay. I suggested Sina 001. Okay, that was it. We were Sina Flight 001.
Due to potentially dangerous weather patterns, traditional voyages over long distances are not taken impulsively. As leader of the voyage, Manny Sakau delayed departure for several months while waiting for stormy weather and high winds to clear. Although the journey to Rota would not happen until May 2009, a public launch ceremony was held in September 2008.
So Pa'atatotano was there. The performers. It was the most beautiful rendition of Osaina I've ever heard to this day.
Osaina is a chant written and popularized during the CHamoru Renaissance that has come to symbolize renewed feelings of pride in CHamoru culture. Nowadays, it is regularly performed at the start of public ceremonies and events.
It was heartfelt, it was deep. They presented gifts on a mat in traditional style. As in any voyage, they had baskets of dried fish. They gave us baskets of cooked taro. We had breadfruit on board. Of course, we always travel with fresh coconut on board. So the ceremony and the blessings and the speeches, of course, followed. You always have to have the speeches. And then after the ceremony, Manny made us all get in a circle and sit on the ground. And I still can't describe or name the ceremony properly. But we took papulu vines, and the 7 of us crew members sat on the ground, holding the vines together and connecting each one of us. And Palomani lit up coconut leaves, and the smoke, he circled around us and had the smoke engulf us. He had us take sand and rub the sand on our chests. And then he placed a coconut frond of protection on us. I understand the ceremony had multiple significance. Number one, it united all of us as one on the crew. The sand was to protect each of us, and the smoke, I believe, was to chase away if any of the crew members had any people that wished him ill, that it would protect us from any outside evil or any outside drama, and that it would cleanse us and unite us as one crew once we boarded the Sina. That was a very significant ceremony, I believe, for every single one of us.
More than 200 people gathered to watch the ceremony. When it ended, they witnessed the first time in centuries that a Chamorro Sakman would enter Guam's waters.
It was very uplifting, and there was an excitement in the air because we're going to do this. And we boarded, and that departure from Paseo, going through the channel with the kulus blowing both on shore and from the canoe, extremely powerful moment.
The following year, despite persistent weather risks, Manny announced the day to launch their journey to Rota had arrived. The crew, which had been anxiously waiting for months, rushed to prepare Sina and gather offerings. Sina, the name of the canoe, is the Chamorro word for elder or parent and can be used to refer to ancestors. Sandra and the rest of the crew sailed that day in honor of their ancestors, a voyage which would represent a deep and soulful connection to their past.
And with me, I took offerings. I had pupulu and pugwa, awfuk, I had turtle shell, and I had grains of rice that were still in the pollen. Out at sea, I offered it up to my ancestors, to my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmothers, all the mothers before me, to protect the voyage, to bless me, to help me be worthy of being on board. So it was quite an experience, and I'm only talking about the emotional side.
Their worst fears manifested when the Saina hit a storm. The crew's training and courage were tested as they faced off against the same elements their sailing ancestors had met and sometimes succumbed to.
And Palomani had, right after midnight of the first night, he says, "I'm sorry, we need to shut now." And the waves were hitting us, the current was strong, the wind, and there was this long pause from the men because it was pitch black. You know, we trained on land, we trained in the ocean before the voyage to Rhoda, but we always trained in daylight. And there was that, I felt that hesitation. And as a mother, you know, I felt protective, and all I could do was just say, "Hey, you've got this. You're CHamoru voyagers. Our spirits are with us. You've got it." And boom, 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 and they did it. But let me tell you, that mass weighs a few hundred pounds, plus the sail, and the boat is rocking and rolling, and it's pitch black. It's not an easy task. So those are some of the experiences that will be with me forever.
A day after leaving Guam, the Saina had yet to arrive. The U.S. Coast Guard was dispatched. After 3.5 hours of searching, they found the boat, just 2 nautical miles off the coast of Rhoda. Soon after, it was towed to shore. Although the media reported that the Saina was lost, the crew maintains that they knew exactly where they were and would have arrived soon after. But the ocean answers to no one's schedule, and a seafarer must learn to respect its power and unpredictability. Manny Sakau died in 2013, but other masters such as Larry Raigetal have taken up the task of preserving and spreading the knowledge of traditional seafaring in Micronesia. Larry had left island as a young man to attend college in San Francisco and later obtained a master's degree from Oxford University. He made a career working in the Foreign Service for the FSM government before feeling a call to return home.
When I had my child, I decided that maybe I needed to raise her at home in Yap. I went back to Yap and continued working for the government for another maybe a decade more. And I woke up one day and I said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to do something. So I went home to Lamatrik and restart again traditional seafaring work from there.
Larry faced pushback for teaching canoe carving and navigation outside the clan. But he pushed on because he too feared the rich traditions he inherited would be lost unless the other masters broadened their views about who could be an apprentice. So Larry formed a nonprofit in Yap called Wage.
Wage and Yap, that was the vision I had, is to engage the elders to transfer skills to the younger generations, even if those participants and those apprentices were not their own.
First, he spoke with close relatives about his plan to ensure their seafaring traditions could survive brain drain and globalization.
And I really kind of started with my dad and my uncles, because them I knew that I could at least explain to them my own point of view of the necessity of having to do it. And to them it was very clear that even though that might have been kind of stepping outside of the box and maybe even breaking established protocols of doing it, that they see what I was telling them as something that it needed to be done. Because the reason why we had started that nonprofit organization was, look, there is a movement of people, and that trend continues and escalating, of our own people from the remote outer islands into Yap. That movement of people might have been focused on cash economy, and the taste of Coca-Cola has reached even those far corners of the earth.
Since 2018, Larry has been teaching courses on canoe building and seafaring at the University of Guam. His students are primarily CHamoru. Nearly 4 decades after Rob first asked Tun Segundo Blas to teach him what he knew of CHamoru canoes, they continue the quest to rediscover their roots. Here's Vanessa Toves, a former student of Larry Raigetal's Seafaring classes.
Hapere, Guausines, Vanessa Toves. I did grow up here. I moved to California around 11, and I've been back and forth throughout the rest of my life. Well, when I ended up in California, it made me look into my culture more and appreciate my culture more, because it's just so different than the culture in the mainland. It was really difficult, actually, to live out there for me personally. I know there's a lot of people who really adapted, or they grew up out there, and a lot of them don't necessarily have a lot of experience with our culture. For me, that was disheartening, and it just made me miss my island and my family. And so actually being pulled from my roots made me connect with my ancestors even more.
After moving back to Guam with her 2 children, she began taking classes at the University of Guam to learn her native language. Vanessa, like Rob before her, hoped to make sense of her people's history of colonization and how it has impacted the culture she's inherited. She says her journey has brought her a feeling of balance and belonging.
That's all part of it as well. That feeling, that calmness, that anaphemalic of where we're all there together to make something really good. And we learned so much. We got to use tools that our ancestors used, and they tell you, oh, you're actually good at that. It just feels rewarding, because I'm Chamorro, my ancestors are Chamorro, and to do exactly what they're doing in the way that they did it, no matter if it's navigation from a Chamorro or if it's navigation from our brothers and sisters of Micronesia, like, we all have that history. We all have that beautiful cultural feeling. And I think it really brought us closer, because most of us were Chamorro and Larry isn't, but for him to be able to give us that, because it was taken away from us due to colonization, I mean, they feel even more like our brothers and sisters that are helping us out and giving us a piece of ourselves back. And I'll be forever grateful that Larry did that class, that he still does that for our people. And, you learn new things, like they might have a different language, but there's so many similarities. And it's like, wow, we really are brothers and sisters. We were before colonizers ever came.
As Chamorros seek to reconnect with their roots and reclaim this wisdom long assumed lost, many other islanders, such as those from Larry's island of Lamotrek, feel that their cultures, lifestyles, and even their very lives are under threat from climate change.
These are low-lying atolls, nothing more than 6 feet above sea level. They're very susceptible to any impact of environment. Climate change is really kind of taking its toll on these islands, and I'm pretty sure that in the not too distant future, people will move. And in that relocation of people is culture change. Understandably, we're going to have to change. And so I've been kind of working with that vision that there is a critical need now.
Larry Raigetal doesn't limit his instruction to the physical carving of a canoe or the memorization of star charts. While these are crucial skills, he reminds his students that open ocean seafaring requires a holistic mindset that prioritizes the interconnectedness of a boat's crew to the natural world. It's grounded in a navigator's deep understanding of their current location in the universe, along with the movement and patterns of what's around them. In other words, a navigator doesn't need instruments when they can work with their crew to read the myriad clues given by the position of the sun, stars, and planets, or the movements of the winds and clouds, the currents and swells, the birds and fish. Larry wants Pacific Islanders to embrace this indigenous knowledge and apply it to other aspects of life if they are to preserve their cultures and successfully navigate new challenges in a fast-changing world.
There's going to be a lot of changes, but at least if we could take some of these things that we think we can use in this new day and age, at least the core values of it, the human connection part, to connect to the environment, the ocean, the land, the skies, You must never forget those roots that give you the knowledge. And when you teach somebody else, you become the root to that person. And the knowledge will grow all these roots of this tree. Because fundamental to the teaching of seafaring lifestyle is that you've got to become that root, part of that root, because when you're a part of the root of the tree, you get to see what that tree eats.
"500 years after Magellan's fateful meeting with Chamorros, a symbol of Spanish exploration and expansion returned to Guam's waters. To commemorate the historic circumnavigation of the globe, the Spanish government dispatched a naval training vessel named the Juan Sebastian Elcano to follow Magellan's route. It left Spain in 2019 and was scheduled to enter Guam's waters on March 6, 2021. Several large events were planned to commemorate this occasion on Guam, although most were canceled or scaled back due to the COVID-19 pandemic. A local commission called Y Historiata, or Our Story, was created to ensure that the Chamorro experience was not lost in the reenactment. Echoing the initial contact between Chamorros and Europeans, the Historiata Commission helped organize a flotilla of traditional canoes that would welcome the Spanish ship as it approached Guam's coast. Sandra Okada was a member of the commission.
Well, that was an incredible effort. Our volunteers and our crew, we worked 12 hours a day for almost 30 days to finish restoring our dudulis and our sackmen. No one left that night. Everyone just slept down at the hut, and it was pitch black when we started to raise the flags on our canoes. We raised the Guam flag. We tried to find some CNMI flags, and once we pushed off into the water and we were heading out, it was a beautiful sight to see one of the Galiti clubs paddle all the way out from Matapang to meet us.
Sandra needed this encounter of Chamorro boats with a Spanish ship to feel different. It should not be another Island of Thieves moment. Instead of a tribute to a bygone conquest, she hoped that this meeting could be rooted in a display of respect.
I had been asking this from the beginning. Can they please, this time, can they ask permission to enter Guam waters? Could we please ask them to give us at least, 3 horn blows, 3 kulus, whatever it takes, 3 bell rings, and allow us as traditional voyagers to be in the water, to grant them permission this time. 500 years later, can we at least do that? So that was really important to me. It was really important to our voyagers and all Chamorros, I believe. That was very significant and very powerful when they sent the text message that they would be acknowledging that and giving 3 long blows to ask for permission. So that was quite a sight to come up against. Even our sackmen is the largest of all the canoes we had out there, but it was just nothing in comparison. And you couldn't help but think back 500 years. We can only imagine what our ancient Chamorros felt like with 3 foreign vessels and white people they've never seen before, enter their waters. So I was very thankful. Spain was respectful enough to grant us that and to acknowledge it. It was a sight to behold. And of course, knowing our history, we're all a little conflicted, but at the same time, we need to celebrate that we're still here and being able to meet them 500 years later in hand-carved canoes built by our people, made of hollowed-out trees from the roots of this land. Yeah, an honor.
Chamorros cannot go back and change what happened in 1521. They cannot restore the burnt canoes. They cannot conjure up the forgotten chants of their ancestors who mapped the stars and seas in verse. but with the help of their Micronesian cousins, they can and have begun to reconnect with their seafaring traditions. Rob Limtiako still sails regularly, and while he does not consider his skills to be of the same caliber as many of the other Carolinian navigators, he still sees himself as being part of the tree root that imparts values and skills to the next generation. A few years ago, he decided to bring his hand-carved canoe to the shore and offer simple sailing lessons to anyone who was interested.
The whole summer I told my wife, I'm going here every day for this amount of time. Put it together, took it down to the beach in Anigua, and it sat there. I would go out by myself, but had recognized by this time in my late 50s, going out for a joyride is okay. I always loved that. But something was missing, I mean, I would go out, sail it, and then I just said, okay. I took my stepbrother out on it. He goes, you got to share this with people. And I said, you're right. So I started inviting people to come out. And after that, word of mouth got out, and I'd get these calls. Hey, could you please take me out? Or my son or my daughter? And of course. And that prompted me to get, reignited my passion. And so that's what I did, and that's what I'm doing now. Yeah, it's actually the most valuable thing I can do with what I have in the context that I have it.
The future of traditional seafaring in Micronesia remains uncertain. However, a clear desire by CHamoRus to reconnect to their roots and the willingness of navigators from the Caroline Islands to share their sacred expertise holds the potential to not just preserve this tradition, but also help islanders adapt to a changing world. Whether it's called the CHamoru Renaissance or a decolonization movement, the act of reclaiming past customs and skills has been an empowering journey for modern CHamoRus. Rather than keeping them stuck in the past, it's made CHamoRus more confident in facing the future. Even when things seem unfamiliar and unfavorable, they can look for answers in the same seas and stars that led them to these islands so long ago.
And so, Guam really does have an opportunity and could be a leader just simply because of our geography and all the people that have migrated here that have these skills, incredible skills, learned over a lifetime. And I think it could add enormous value to our leadership here, to our people and our youth. That hasn't happened yet on a large scale. It's happening on a small scale. Some of the canoe groups are doing it, but I think we still have a long ways to go.
That concludes part 2 of this episode. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen. If you enjoyed it, please share Memoirs Pacifica with your friends and leave a review. We want to quickly acknowledge that we are very aware that there are many canoe houses, navigators, and seafaring groups in Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the FSM that were not mentioned in this episode, who have played and continue to play a critical role in traditional seafaring. There was a lot to cover, and sadly we couldn't interview or give a shout out to everyone. But Sizuas Ma'asi to each of you, and please keep doing what you're doing. And a final bit of news. We have one more episode planned for this season of Memoirs Pacifica. It will be different from our other episodes in the sense that it's not focused on a single topic. Instead, it will feature several interesting, funny, and surprising portions of interviews from past episodes that didn't make the final cut, but that we do want to share with you. So look for that in late November. Until then, Saina Ma'asi, and take care.
Memoirs Pacifica is supported through grants from Humanities Guahan, the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Humanities.